So today I'm going to be talking about relevance and engagement and the key role that they play in adult literacy, and also the key challenges that they both pose for really addressing adult literacy. So just to quickly go over what I'll be talking about today, starting with the relationship between engagement and learning. Engagement being such a key, fundamental, foundational factor for real learning to happen. And engagement relies on a bunch of other factors, choice, relevance, compelling content. And so when we talk about literacy and the role of engagement in learning how to read, one of the key pieces is relevance and having content that is personally meaningful and relevant. So I'm going to talk about why that's such a challenge and why the cultural relevance gap ends up being twofold in adult literacy. All of the different facets of what it really means to be relevant for content, and how we can take the problems it poses for adult literacy and start turning them into solutions. How do we address these two key gaps for adult illiteracy with cultural relevance, and what kind of content will enable us to provide adult readers with choices for books that will help them actually read and improve their reading. So that's just a really quick overview, and I'll dive into each piece now. So at the very base of it is, for adult literacy or illiteracy, the goal is for learning to take place, for these adult learners to actually overcome the gaps in their reading skills and learn to read. And we know, both from a common sense standpoint, but also from a lot of research, that for real meaningful learning to happen, engagement is absolutely fundamental. If learners are not passive, you don't just passively receive information, whether it's in a classroom setting or from reading books or articles. You have to actively engage with the content. You have to find meaning in the content in order to learn it and store it in your mind and make meaning from what you're learning. And so engagement itself also relies on many factors, and the one I'm focusing on here is relevance. In order for anyone to meaningfully engage with something, we have to find personal meaning in what it is. It has to align with something that we care about, whether it's our interests, our background, our identity as a person, the things we like to do. We have to find personal meaning in what we're reading to really deeply engage with it. And so relevance is this crucial kind of foundational ingredient for engagement, and engagement is a crucial foundational element for learning to take place. Sorry, I'm trying to get to my next slide here. Yeah. Looks like my slides froze. Sorry, I'm having a technical glitch here. I might have to proceed without them, but oh, there they all are. Okay. Is my screen still being shared? Yeah. All right, sorry about that. I don't know why it froze. Okay, so building on the important role of engagement and relevance, I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem that this poses for adult illiteracy. We know that it's a huge population of readers teens and adults who lack key literacy skills. It's 90 million in the United States and It's over 200 million globally. And we know that the only way to improve reading skills is to read. There's absolutely no way to become a stronger reader if you don't spend time practicing reading. But we also know that no one wants to read stories, as I mentioned, that are uninteresting or irrelevant to their lives. You're never going to be excited reading content that you don't find some kind of personal connection to, that doesn't in some way align with you. And the problem is that for adult struggling readers who have lower literacy skills, we don't have enough content that is both interesting and relevant at their age and interests, but also accessible at their lower reading levels. And so without content that meets this intersection, the right kind of content to read that is both accessible and compelling and relevant, older readers, adults who struggle with literacy, stop reading and then fall further and further behind. So I was going to talk quickly about a kind of a personal example. When I was teaching at one point, I had a student, Nicole, and many students like Nicole, who were newcomers to the US. Nicole was from the Dominican Republic. She had just moved to the Boston area. She was a mature young lady who was clever and witty and thoughtful, very opinionated, but she was reading below a first grade level. And as her teacher, I needed to figure out how to get Nicole to read more so that she would improve her reading skills. But Nicole wanted absolutely nothing to do with the books that were intended for students reading at for students who were in first grade. Stories like Berenstain Bears or Curious George were not only uninteresting to Nicole, they were embarrassing for her. And so when I looked for books to find that she could actually read, I found that there weren't enough choices that were written at the first grade level, but not intended for first graders. And Nicole, as she put it herself, when I started reading books, I was reading baby books. And I was like, why am I reading baby books? And I would get irritated and I wouldn't want to read it, so I wouldn't read at all. And as I've already mentioned, when you stop reading, you don't improve. But who could blame Nicole for not wanting to read content that was not intended for women her age? Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. No, I went too far. So this content gap is broader and structurally ingrained. Nicole is not alone. There are millions of teens and adults who fit into the same category with this fundamental mismatch between their age and interest level. We talk about this transition from learning to read to reading to learn, and then the concept of also reading to live. So in early elementary school, we learn to read, and we in this country and more broadly, we teach students how to read in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And there's a lot of structure built up around that teaching how to read. The books are on level, meaning that we have, we're teaching first graders how to read, and we have tons of choices of books that are for first graders as they're learning to read. And the same in second grade. We teach them how to decode, we teach them comprehension. At that point, there's a match between students learning to read and the content available for teaching them how to read. Once students hit third, fourth grade, we switch from learning to read to reading to learn. And at that point, the expectation is students know how to read. So the fourth graders are expected to have the proficiency that they need to have in order to read to learn, in order to access new information using their foundational reading skills as a tool. So in order to succeed in science class or social studies class, they need to be able to read textbooks or read the instructions on more complex homeworks or read articles in order to access new information and continue their learning through middle school and high school. So what happens if you're a student like Nicole, who's in the read to learn phase, but don't actually know how to read yet? Again, it's large numbers of students, and these students, not only are they not learning how to read, they're also falling behind in their other learning across the subjects because they don't have the skill and tool of reading. then you move beyond reading to learn. It's this concept of reading to live. After high school, again, the assumption is that you know how to read. And so you need to be able to read in order to fully function and thrive in society, whether it's understanding the instructions on a prescription bottle, or your lease, or the car insurance form. Being able to read is so foundational for being able to access information, being an informed member of society, being able to raise your own children as readers by reading them bedtime stories. And so at this point, just like when you're supposed to be reading to learn, without those skills, you fall further behind in kind of daily functioning and learning. And not only that, what are you using to read in order to improve? So if you're trying to become a stronger reader, you don't have content that is relevant for your age and your interests and your cultural identity, but also accessible at your much lower reading levels. We publish books, we create content, we craft instruction for the learn to read phase, and we don't think about that for the read to learn and read to live phase. And so there's a mismatch there. There's not the right intersection of content for all of the people who get beyond that initial phase, not having the fundamental literacy skills they need in order to be proficient readers and do everything that goes along with reading. Without the accessible reading material, it becomes this vicious cycle. You need to learn to read, but you don't have the right content to do so. Okay. So I'm just going to come back to relevance. Relevance means a lot of different things. It's kind of a broad word. We talk mostly about cultural relevance, which is a term from Gladson Billings, who talks about how fundamental it is to utilize students' culture as a vehicle for their learning, to really understand who is the person who's learning, what do they bring to the table, and how does what we teach them or what we offer them to read really tap into that, to draw out their engagement, and therefore their learning. And so we need to find ways to link students' lives to their learning. And this applies to reading, to content as well, because we all know, again, the importance of being able to see ourselves in the books that we read. You can connect, if you can really connect with what you're reading, then you read it more deeply, more meaningfully. And so cultural relevance is a crucial piece of learning to read for adults. And the reason it's so tricky when it comes to adult illiteracy is because there are these two fundamental gaps, cultural relevance gaps, that adults who struggle with reading have to face. One, which we talk about a lot more now, is with regards to race and ethnicity. We know that there's a great lack of diverse books. It's made, there's been some important strides in this area in the past 5 years, even having more books that feature main characters who have, come from minority backgrounds, from a range of different backgrounds, identities, ethnicities, but still it's a major gap. And so that's one piece, is a lot of the adults who struggle with reading, who lack literacy skills, are minorities and often don't have options for books where they can see themselves reflected. And then the other piece that we think about a lot at Story Shares is age, is the cultural relevance with regards to age. So not only are you not seeing characters in stories that look like you, that have the same background, also you're not having options for books that have characters that are at least around the same age, dealing with the types of problems, challenges, life situations that you are. So that comes back to Nicole, who doesn't want to read, the Berenstain Bears' first trip to the dentist, because that's not anything that means anything to her life anymore. She wants to read about 20-year-olds who are facing trouble in their neighborhood, things that she actually cares about and relates to. And so for adult literacy, there are these two prongs. There are not enough books that are relevant on either of them. I mean, and all these, but those are the two real gaps that need to be addressed. And so adults who struggle with literacy in order to improve, in order to really actually jump up levels and become more proficient readers, need relevant, mature, accessible content at all reading levels. They need to have a new collection of books. Gosh, I'm sorry, I just lost my thing again. Let's see. Okay. Hopefully you can still hear and see me. I can't quite tell what's going on. Anyway, we need to build a new shelf in the library for adults and teens who struggle with reading that has books with culturally relevant themes, both from a identity standpoint, but also from an age standpoint, age appropriate characters, and then accessible language at a range of levels. So simpler sentences and phrasing, a more approachable format, all these things that make books more accessible for struggling readers so that we can replace books like Curious George, The Berenstain Bears, Dora the Explorer that are not interesting, that are totally irrelevant, with ones that actually can be meaningful for older readers to connect with. And so this is what we've been working to do with Story Shares. We have found that with incentives and tools and some awareness and guidance that writers will create relevant content for adult readers. We actually crowdsource books from this large existing population of writers who are always looking for an audience by doing writing contests. We provide some guidance on here's how you create content that is compelling and relevant, but also readable for older readers. And then we do a call for stories, and we get thousands of them, which then are able to become a collection of books for the readers who need content that they can actually engage with in order to improve their skills. And what we see and what we know is that more reading leads to improved skills and therefore better chances for success. With new, relevant, and readable choices, we see more engaged reading, and with more engaged reading comes improved literacy skills, which results in better academic outcomes and ultimately a better quality of life. We know that being able to read it opens many doors. Not being able to read creates so many obstacles that are hard to overcome. So I'm just going to finish quickly by talking about one more example of someone I've worked with. So this is Robbie, who, like Nicole, was a struggling reader, reluctant reader and writer, and had kind of decided reading is not for him. He's not going to ever become a strong reader. When you get to that read to learn or read to live point as a non-fluent reader, very often you have decided reading is boring and painful and not for you, and so that's where the kind of shutting down comes in, and this was very much Robbie. But he found this book that spoke to him, that hooked him for whatever reason, Jacob and the Bee-Man. And the book begins with Jacob, who's the main character, saying, last year I did something really bad and I got in a lot of trouble for it, but I'm not going to tell you what it was. And he never does tell you. So the book ends without him having revealed what he had done that was so bad. Well, Robbie really wanted to know what Jacob had done. And so since the book never revealed it to him, he decided he'd write his own prequel. So he ended up going in during his free time every day to work on this new book. And ultimately he got the chance to publish it as part of this collection. So it was one of the most fun things to see, because it's what we realize is that's what happens when a struggling reader or a student or an adult or anyone finds a book that they really connect with. That's what happens when they have choices for content that's relevant and therefore engaging, and that's how we see real improvement in literacy, adult literacy. That is all. So, thank you very much. Sorry for my technical difficulties.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Do we have any questions for Louise? And I know I have one that I can start off with. You're talking about incentivizing writers to write more content that really speaks to an older reader. Outside of contests, have you guys done anything different?
Ha, sorry, like, what do you mean? Like,
You said you were incentivizing writers to write content that more fit those who were older and learning how to read. You said
yeah.
you've done writing contests to get them to actually produce content within the levels of adults who are increasing their literacy skills. Have you done anything outside of contests to incentivize writers to start making more content?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, so contests are kind of our main vehicle, but we just do one a year. So we also have been basically building up this kind of grassroots community of writers. We've created a writer advisory panel, and we have who kind of help us brainstorm ways to get writers engaged. The interesting thing about this method is that what we've learned is, writers inherently want an audience, and so they're seeking a way to get their content and what they're writing out there. So many of them just don't even know about this population of adult readers who need a different type of book, and so we just spend a lot of time kind of thinking about ways to connect with writers, just by spreading awareness around the need, whether that's working with creative writing programs at colleges and grad schools, tapping into, writers workshops, having this panel of kind of this initial community of writers we have that now contribute all along the year, who kind of continue creating new books, not just for the contest, but across the course of the year. So those are the main things. And then we're also using technology for it, having our digital writing tool as a way for writers to actually create and then publish these ebooks, which incorporate some of the guidance on how, what they need to be. So that's been motivating as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We do have one question in the chat box, and it says, describe informational writing versus stories to help adults with academic success.
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a big push for nonfiction right now more broadly. I think the way we look at it with story shares is that both are important. And when I talk about, the importance of engagement and relevance and actually being interested, a big piece of that is authentic choice. And so some people are more drawn to nonfiction, to informational writing, and some are more drawn to stories and fiction. And so having really a range of both is a crucial piece of being able to actually, offer choices that will engage with readers, regardless of where they're coming from and their interests. And so we want to have really a range of both. I think, being able to read informational text is key and is on a lot of levels more challenging. So that's definitely a piece of it. But sometimes stories are a really good bridge to some of those more difficult, more complex types of content.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see another question in the chat box, but I'll give it a little more time. Another question. I know you started off with learning is not passive. You have to find meaning in the content so that you can engage. Do you feel that in the current education system here in the U.S., that even as children, they're started with learning in more of a passive way than being more engaged in what they're learning? Because maybe it's a pattern to where we start off with passive learning as children, and that's how they kind of follow the cracks when they need a little more engagement, a little more specific.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems is that the traditional kind of model and method of schooling is more passive, right? It's teacher stands at the front of the room, students sit and listen and absorb knowledge. And I think, there's a lot of awareness around it now. And so, steps have definitely been made to try and change that up. And there's project-based learning, and there's efforts to really engage students more deeply in their learning. But on a lot of levels, it's easier to sort of just tell versus to engage. And so I think we have a long way to go as far as moving from still more of the passive learning model to a more deeply engaged model that will really deepen learning. across the board.
Thank you, thank you. There is another question. Do you think this audience of learners is more comfortable reading on phones and devices versus books? Is learning effectiveness equivalent print versus device reading?
Yeah, that's a good question also. We have found so to the first part of the question, we have found in our research just so far a real mix. There's definitely a level of comfort for a lot of readers with the digital realm. Having ebooks offers some, first of all, it takes away the stigma because you can't see, your peers can't tell if the book is maybe a lower level from afar. It all looks the same, so there's that. It also has the option to integrate tools like audiobooks or click on a word and get a definition, highlighting. So there's some features that can support reading that people appreciate through digital. But on the other hand, we still find a lot of people really like a traditional book in your hand, being able to underline it as you go. There's a lot of lack of access still to kind of consistent digital ways of reading. So we find that both are really important. I think that the second question, yes, learning effectiveness is equivalent through both. So we always talk about any reading is good reading. Some people say, audiobooks is not reading, but actually reading is making meaning from text. And so whether that's digital, whether that's print, whether that's even listening as an initial way of doing it, those are all valuable and important.
Thank you. I'll do last call if there are any other questions. So if you do have a question to post to Louise, please type it in the chat window. We'll give it a couple seconds to see if something pops up. All righty. I don't see anything popping up. Celia says thank you.
Thank you.
But with that, when we say any reading is good reading, and talking about blended models where, as long as you're reading, it can be a physical book, it can be on a device, but it's getting you moving, it's getting you in the right direction to be able to increase those skills. And so we do have our communities competition that is launched, where we are incentivizing the community in the US to be able to distribute some of the apps that have been developed in our Adult Literacy X Prize competition. So it's great to see that what Story Shares is doing and what we're doing here at X Prize go hand in hand, because it's all about increasing access and allowing adults to be able to increase their literacy skills in a convenient format that can also be blended into any classes they may also be taking at the current time. So I will let you guys know that you can go to our communities competition website to learn more about that, and I'll get that up in just a second so that you'll have the website, and it's communities.xprize.org. Again, that's communities.xprize.org. If you guys can see that. Here we go. So hopefully you guys can see that on the share screen. If you go to communities.xprize.org, you'll be able to learn more about the X Prize Communities Competition, how you can sign up and be a part of this transformative opportunity to win money and also get the additional apps out to those who are learners. And our next Literation Lounge will be on September 12th, 2018, 10 a.m. And Dr. Carol Clymer of the Education Department at State University will be talking about the nuts and bolts of integrated education and training. So once again, all those who are on this call, you're invited with additional details. And we do put this presentation up on our Adult Literacy X Prize YouTube channel, just in case you want to be able to share out and be able to, spread the wealth and share some of the great things that Louise is doing at Story Shares to be able to bridge that gap and make sure that we have more, pertinent and relevant content when it comes to our adult learners. So with that, if there aren't any other questions or any other statements, we can call this quits. Thank you so much, Louise, for your time today, for giving your expertise And I'm loving, what I'm taking with me from this is we want to go from learning to read, to reading to learn, to reading to live. And I actually took notes. I wrote that down. So thank you so much for sharing that and for being a champion of those who are looking to increase their literacy skills, dispelling myths, and really empowering people to live the life of their dreams.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having me.
All righty. Goodbye, everybody, and we'll close it out for now.